Hi, in our lecture, we discussed about the K-means and K-mode clustering algorithm. So today we'll be discussing about three other algorithms. One is hierarchical clustering, and then Gaussian mixture model, also known as GMM, and the third one is dbscan. Hi, so we have two kinds of hierarchical clustering. One, what you call agglomerative clustering, and the other one is divisive. And the whole idea is that you group items based on the similarity of data points, and the agglomerative clustering is actually a bottom-up approach, and the other one is the top-down approach. So let's try to understand the differences through an example. So here we have a hierarchical clustering array for a country-wise protein consumption data set. And the idea of the agglomerative clustering, you start in a bottom-up fashion. You do a comparison between all pairs of data points, and based on some predefined threshold, you do a pair-wise grouping for. You start by taking each of your data points as one cluster, and then you try to merge cluster based on some distance metric and some criteria. So here we can see that in the first run, we have Italy and Greece. They are grouped as one group, Likewise, Ireland and Switzerland were identified as one group. So you start with each country being one cluster, and then you try to merge cluster, and you just move upwards, So in the second level, you can see that Italy and Greece cluster was merged with USSR cluster, and likewise, you were actually growing up your clusters, So the whole idea is that if you trace all your merging points, then you explain your data at different levels or different hierarchy, that you have different clusters. Here you have one cluster, and the second level you have two clusters, and the third level you have four clusters. So you are keeping a track of your clustering history, by tracing where the merge were done. So here you have the first merge, and here you have the second merge, and so forth, so on. And you can think divisive is in the other way. So you start all data points to be in one cluster, and you divide the data points based on some criteria and some distant metric. And this graph is actually called dendrogram. And here the color labels are telling the story for two levels of clustering. So the first is you have all the data points in your blue cluster, then you grow a green cluster, and then in the orange cluster. So the next clustering algorithm is what we call Gaussian mixture model. So from the name, you can guess that here we are talking about some Gaussian distribution. Okay. So the whole idea is, for a lot of data points, we see a multimodal distribution. So although the underlying data may have a Gaussian distribution, but one distribution doesn't fit the data well. Rather, you have independent Gaussian distributions that actually explain the data. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Let's take one example and try to understand. So here I have plotted some data distribution for a group of kids. So the kids are actually from grade 5, 6, and 10. So you can imagine all the kids at grade 5 will have their own height distribution, and then we can imagine that grade 6 are actually a little bit higher than the grade 5 students. And if you take the grade 10 students, the group seems to be more higher, but also the distance between these two groups should be higher. So here we are showing some plot for those three groups of students and their heights, and this is actually a kind of good simulation of the data that we are actually explaining, and we can clearly see that this distribution is for group grade 10 students, and they are actually far away from the other two. But one thing sure, if you want to model all the students from grade 5, 6, and 10, then it is very likely that we won't have one Gaussian distribution. Rather, you will have 3 model distributions. So one distribution, if you want to capture all the students from grade 5, 6, and 10 in using one distribution, then 3 independent Gaussian distribution will be a better fit than one Gaussian distribution. So that's the whole idea. So if we recall that Gaussian distribution or normal distribution has 2 parameters, one is mean and then the standard deviation. And there is a third component in the Gaussian mixture model, and that is pi. So in terms of distribution, it is explaining that quality of one student height is actually a summation of 3 Gaussian distributions that are actually independent for 3 groups of students. And there is a pi here that is actually telling that what is the class distribution, So imagine that what is the probability of that particular group, So for in this case, you can think that if a student is coming, then the distribution should be equal, because the likelihood of a student may be equal for all 3 classes, But anyway, the whole idea is that the pi parameter is like how much weight you put for every class, and then for a new data points, in case of one Gaussian distribution, you will have one mu and one standard deviation, but for a group of Gaussian distribution, you will have their independent pi and then their independent mu's, and here this is not independent. Here we call this is a covariance matrix. That's how this distribution is noted. Okay. We will learn dependent distributions for each component or each group, and then we will use all the groups independent parameters and distribution to explain a new data point. Okay. So when a new data point comes, then because you learn this distribution, for each component or group. So JK being one of the classes and then its own distribution, and here this is the pi, and this is the distribution, and the normalization constant is when you sum up all the values from all the classes, and this actually gives you a probability. So this is basically the Bayes rule. You are using the Bayes rule to label a new data point. Okay. One good thing with Gaussian distribution, because if you recall our k-means clustering or hierarchical clustering, they are giving each data point one exclusive level. Okay, so let's take this as an example. So it's the same graph, but I'm trying to explain that you have a red dot data point here and then the blue dot data point here. The good thing with Gaussian mixture model, imagine that you have a data point here. So this is clearly, it is falling under the second group or second class, and here the red data points, you can imagine that this is very likely that it might be from the first group or maybe from the second group. So in terms of k-means clustering or hierarchical clustering, you don't have overlapping scores. You just, when you decide that this group, this should go to this first class, so you have a sharp transition here. So you just chop off here, but for the Gaussian mixture model, you can actually assign a soft label. Soft label meaning you're not saying that this red data point is actually completely to either the first group or second group. Rather, you are saying that you have a 50% or maybe 49% chance of being in class 2 and 51% being in class 1. So this gives huge advantage, because when you will be doing extended level probabilistic modeling where you want to use the likelihood or maybe like the probability, then the k-means clustering or hierarchical clustering, those algorithm doesn't work. So this is the advantage of using Gaussian mixture model. Okay. Next, we'll be discussing about another clustering algorithm, what we call dbscan, and dbscan is a distribution-based clustering algorithm. So it has 2 parameters, the minimum point and then epsilon. So the whole idea is that you start with a core point, or core seed, and you estimate the distance between this core point to all the other points and try to cover those points that are within the epsilon. So if you have at least 3 points, then you assume that those are within the same cluster. Okay. So you started with this point, we got these 3 points to be on cluster, and then we update, and then we try to cover our surrounding points by updating this core point. Okay. And another thing is that you can start with like more than one seed or more than one core point. Okay. So we started with 2 initial core points, and you can see that how this algorithm is growing and is trying to actually get one cluster. Okay. So this actually ends getting the red cluster done, and then it ended up getting 4 clusters at the end. Okay. So one, the red cluster, and then you will see here we are getting the blue cluster, and then green cluster, and then yellow cluster. Okay. So far we have learned about 4 clustering algorithm, and here I am showing one comparison study that is available in the sklearn repo. So we can clearly see that certain algorithms are good to cluster certain format of data. Okay. So this is the k-mean run, and you can clearly see that k-mean algorithm, although was doing good for this particular setup, but for this format of data or this form, it's not doing that good, because the k-means algorithm actually estimates the similarities, and the whole algorithm works with the assumption that you will have a centroid base, and here the format is actually a centroid within a centroid. So, for this kind of format, k-means algorithm doesn't work good. Here you have a spiral kind of setup data, and again the algorithm missed that. Okay. On the contrary, if you look at dbscan was able to find cluster for this format and this format as well. It's doing fairly good for all possible setups. So the agglomerative clustering, you can see that it will suffer again for this format of data because it doesn't know the distribution, but it was not that bad for some other data, for example here, but here it is struggling because it thought that we have just one group of data. Okay. And Gaussian mixture model, I think Gaussian mixture model should be good for this format of data and also this format of data, just like this is an extension of k-means algorithm. So I have provided the references. So if you go to this reference, then you will see the comparison study that I was referring to. And if you go to this link, then you will get all the clustering implementation that is provided with a sklearn package, and you can try by yourself by running any of the algorithms. Thank you.